Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to make a quilt using all of my leftover bits and pieces of Christmas fabric. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today's quilt I call Hills and Valleys. It is inspired by and based off a pattern from Jenny Doan at Missouri Star Quilts. Jenny calls it the Lakeview Terrace quilt, and she also uses the same block in a quilt she calls Diamond Terrace. So if you look up both of those videos, you'll see that the block I show you today can be used to make the quilt I'm going to make, which I call Hills and Valleys, or to make the Diamond Terrace block that Jenny makes. But we're going to do it all in Christmas fabrics. I collected every little scrap of Christmas fabric I had in my collection and started to cut it up to make this project and the half log cabin Christmas quilt, which I have a video for as well. So let's dive right in. To make the Hills and Valleys Christmas quilt, I went through all of my Christmas fabrics and I picked out everything that I thought coordinated. And from that pile, I cut all of these colored units, and they are 2.5 by 4 inches when you cut them. And then the background squares are 2.5 by 4.5 for these are exactly the same. And for these units, you need 2.5-inch squares to add to each end. So my final project, I did all the math, and I decided that I wanted to make it 7 units across by 11 units down. That's going to be 77 blocks in total. And so I did the math to figure out how many of each of these pieces I needed. In the end, I needed to make 231 that look like this and 154 to look like this. Our final block gets laid out in a 5-block unit. So we have one like this, one like this. Then we take one of these and we turn it in the other direction like that. So we start to make the hill, and then we come down the other side of the hill. So another one of these, and then let me find something different. Here we go. That is the 5-block unit for the Hills and Valleys quilt, and you can see how those train up and down. So in order to increase the efficiency of my sewing, I thought, how can I break this down to speed quilt or to feed the units through the machine with a little bit of efficiency? If you want to, you can lay out each of the 77 blocks like this, take it over to the machine, sew it together, one block at a time. This is about enjoying the process, however your process works. But for me, I wanted to see if I could speed things up a little. So I looked at it and I thought, is this unit and this unit the same? If I sew 77 times 2 of these, will it turn out to be the same? And to test that, I took these two and thought, can I spin it around so that it looks like this? And the answer is no, absolutely not. So that wasn't going to work. But then I thought, I could make 77 that look like this, 77 that look like this, then sew the 2Zs to the 4Zs, and then come back and add that last unit at the end. So that's what I decided to do. And that lets me randomize things a little bit as well. So I went through my entire stack of pre-sewn units like this, and I divided them up. I took the ones that were all exactly the same, and I divided them into 3 piles to ensure that I had a nice mix of this one fabric across the entire quilt in each of the 3 different positions. All of these ones, which are exactly the same, I left in one pile. So then I took the pile, because I have 3 of these piles, I took one pile and matched them up with a second unit, trying to make sure that I matched the reds with greens and the greens with reds, made sure none of them were exactly the same, of course, made sure none of the tones of the colors were exactly the same to get a nice mix and variety. So I made a stack of those, and they are right here. And then I made a stack of these, doing exactly the same thing, making sure there was a nice mix. I haven't finished pressing all of them, but most of them are right here. And then this last pile here is the 5th block that's going to go into the series. But my next step will be to pair up these units, these groups. So I won't sew these two together because there's way too much similarity. So I'll dig through the pile until I get a nice variety, perhaps this one. And I'll sew these together into a group of 4. And then I'll come back and I'll add the 5th one, making sure that all 5 of those are different through each of the blocks. That way I'll get a nice mix. Even though I have an actual limited number of Scrappy Christmas fabrics, this will give me a nice mix. And then once I have those 77 blocks, I will lay them out and make sure that we don't have too many of the same fabrics within too close a proximity to each other. When pressing these units, I recommend that you actually fold it over by hand like this, and then bring the iron down on top and press. Because the units are relatively narrow compared to their length, it's pretty easy to stretch them out of shape so that they become almost curved. So when I first started making the units, I was pressing them like this and just peeling this back and ironing at the same time. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. Can you see the curve that I get, particularly around this seam? And so then I was overcompensating by trying to then stretch it into shape by pulling and pushing and using the seam of the iron to straighten things out. And it works, and it's fine, but I found it's actually much easier just to roll it back first, make sure it's nice and straight, and then bring the iron down on top of it. And it particularly works well as your ironing surface starts to warm up. So now that this is warm, because the iron has been here, pressing this open is pushing this open with my hands is actually even easier, and then bringing the iron down on top of it. And you get a nice straight edge here without the pushing and the pulling and the warping of the fibers. And ultimately, because we're going to have 5 of these units or 5 of these blocks all in a row for the final unit, you don't want them to start to get wobbly here and wobbly in the next one and then wobbly as you add the last seam. You want to keep it as nice and straight as possible throughout the whole project. I have finished the 77 blocks for the Hills and Valleys quilt, and I will take the time to lay these all out, probably downstairs on the floor in the kitchen, to make sure that I don't have too many of the same fabrics too close to each other in the final layout. Despite it being a scrappy quilt, there isn't the usual kind of variety that I like to see in my scraps. So I don't want to have too many of the same fabrics too close to each other. So I will take the time to lay it out. But to make the hills and valleys, what you do once you've made these blocks is you start to lay them out, one with the valley, and then the next upside down to create the hill, and then on it goes. The next one right side up, upside down, right side up, upside down. And at first it looks weird because the illusion isn't created in a single row. You actually need multiple rows to get the illusion to start to show up. So let me see if I can show you what I mean. So I'm not sure how much of this you can see on camera, but the valley starts here and then it grows down into the second row into the hill and then back down into the valley up into this first row. And this is where the illusion carries through across multiple rows. And so this part here, this is the hill that will connect into the row above it, and so on. So the layout can be a bit tricky when you're looking at a small scale like this because it looks like your pieces don't match up across the row, and they're not intended to. They're meant to have the illusion across 2 rows. So I'm going to lay all these out on the floor and get my 7 blocks by 11 blocks all laid out and get them sewn together. So this is the Hills and Valleys quilt all laid out on the floor in my kitchen. And I think it looks pretty good. The reds and the yellows are pretty well balanced. I definitely had an overabundance of green, but I'm glad there's a light green, a dark green, and kind of a limey green in there. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was very, very conscious as I was piecing these blocks together to make sure that all the trees that could be right side up were right side up. So the green trees here, and the little Christmas tree here, and even the little Nordic sweaters to make sure the trees and the reindeer were all right side up in each of the blocks. But what I completely forgot about was that every other block was turned upside down. So you can see I've got some upside down Nordic sweaters and some upside down trees in a bunch of places. And as soon as I started to lay it out, I thought, oh man, oh well, we're nothing if we can't laugh at ourselves. Even the little villages here are right side up in every single block, which means when they feature in other sections of the quilt, the little village pieces are upside down. But I guess the positive is that now the quilt has no right side. There's no top or bottom. It looks perfect in both directions. Now I just need to lift this up off the floor and sew all the blocks together. Thanks very much for watching this video on the Hills and Valleys Christmas quilt. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll give it a try to use up some of your leftover bits and pieces. This pattern would look fantastic in any number of different colorways, with just random scraps, with a dark background to highlight some bright fabrics. You could do just about anything. It's quick and easy and an amazing way to use up your leftovers. I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks very much for watching, and enjoy making the most of your fabric bits and pieces.